Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential, because when you keep growing, we all get stronger, and we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
You're listening to Random Fit with hosts Wendy Batts and Ken Miller, winner of a Gold Markham Award for Digital Media.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Random Fit with myself, Ken Miller, and my co-host, Wendy Batts. Wendy, how you doing?
I'm excellent. How are you?
I am great, as always, and I love recording these episodes, especially when we have an opportunity to talk about things training. So in this episode of Random Fit, Wendy, I am looking forward to your insight when it comes to the pitfalls of techniques. So we talk about 5 techniques that you must master if you are a personal trainer, strength coach, or if you're just an avid exerciser. So we want to talk about things for you guys to avoid when it comes to techniques, poor techniques.
Oh, well, yeah, I think we could probably say there's definitely more than 5. We always talk, Ken, about the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints and how important they are. And when we talk about that, all we mean is that the feet are pointed straight ahead, the knees are in line with the second, third toe, our hips are in neutral position, our shoulders have really good alignment, and then our ears are in line with our shoulder. So not that our shoulders are rounded and our heads forward and it's in alignment, but if we were to look at you from a side view and everything was properly lined up, when we refer to that, we do that on purpose because what we've found with those specific kinetic chain checkpoints is that you're in better alignment and positioning within the joint in order to maximize the prime mover that you're focusing on when you're actually working out. So when we talk about a common pitfall, of course, we could have always started with the foot and ankle, but if we could only choose 5, because there's one that's outside of the kinetic chain checkpoints that we want to discuss, I think it's important that we talk about the knees. And Ken, when the knees go inward, we see a lot of things going wrong. So why don't you lead us off a little bit about why we chose that as our first one?
Well, I think the knees, it's the first one. I think it's because it's the first one. My thoughts on why it's the first one is because, one, it's very easy to see, right? So I can see knees being out of a good position, basically from the front. That's the best vantage point to see what the knees are doing. But also the knees are important as far as a major joint because, and we'll talk about these other joints as far as the ankle and the hip go, but the knee is a reflection of what's happening above it and below it. So it'll also, for one, watching if the knees are going too far in for too long, it's a reflection of, okay, well, how much stability am I getting or stability and strength from the hip above the knee, but also what kind of support is there for the knee with the feet below. So that's why when we talk about the knee or even look at the knee and watch the mechanics of the knee, it's a reflection of what else is happening around it. So you have some insight on what other things you can work on. But with the knee, I have a lot of older clients that I work with, and I've had clients that have had 1 or 2 knee replacements, or they're talking about knee replacements happening. They're projecting that out with their doctor already. They don't need it now, but it's something that they're looking at later on down the road. So the knee is an important joint to watch because of what it says for what's happening above and what's happening below when it comes to, okay, what limitations are there? What lack of ability is there above and below? So the knees, just it's one of those that is really debilitating when it doesn't have a chance to move properly. So and you did a great job of describing the kinetic chain checkpoints and the alignment, but we ideally in movement, the knee is lying between the middle of the foot and the hip. So if we're talking about performing something like a squat or a lunge, watching proper form and technique in the knee means if I'm lunging forward, my toe is pointing forward, my toes are pointing forward along with the kneecap. They're both pointing in the same direction. I don't want my feet pointing towards 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock and my knee pointing at 1 o'clock. So we want to have alignment for that knee, because it's just how the knee should move, because we would consider it more of a hinge joint, although all joints do move in multiple directions.
Well, so with that being said, if the knees are caving inward, the adductors, so the inner thigh muscles are usually overactive, and what they're doing is they're pulling, especially if it's coming from the hip, they're pulling those knees inward because they're in a shortened position. So it's causing those knees to come inward. So what we know based on biomechanics is that our outer hips are usually weaker, and they're allowing that compensation to occur. Now, again, it could be the short head of the bicep femoris that crosses the knee joint because we have overactive calves, but let's take the calves out of it at this moment and think about what's happening just at the adductors. When we say common pitfalls and exercises that we see, especially when we go to the gym, the abductor and adductor machines. So if you're sitting down in a machine and you have the legs spread out and you're sitting down and you put your thighs on this inside of the machine and you drive the weight inward to where your knees meet together, you're working again on the adductors. So the inner thigh muscles that are already in an overactive, shortened position. And, I see females, and I'm going to pick on this because I am one, thinking, well, okay, if I do a lot of these adductors, so adductors, they're coming inward, I'm going to lose the fat on the inside of my thighs. Guys, that is not true. What we're really doing is you're in a seated position and you're pushing this inward. You're already shortening the hips. And if you're driving that inward, we're working a muscle, again, that's in a shortened position. However, it doesn't mean let's crank it up and try to go as heavy as we can. Some people will put it on a lighter weight and just continue just to do that motion. Well, that motion and that continuous motion is causing even more overactivity in a muscle that's already overactive. On top of that, how many people want to have gigantic inner thigh muscles? Unless you're a bodybuilder and you need to specifically line this up, I don't know that many females that want to have a huge adductor muscle. So what we're doing is, as we're loading it or doing these repetitive movements, we're trying to get muscle inside of that. It's not going to take away the fat. What's going to take away the fat is really thinking about your calories in, calories out, your nutrition. And so you can do this all day if you want, but if that is where your ultimate goal is to build gigantic inner thigh muscles, then load it up and keep doing that. However, there are better ways to get better mobility working on that. And if that is a compensation that you see, stay away from that machine and do things like a lateral tube walk where you're standing and walking side by side to get those outer hip muscles to fire to help reduce the chances of those knees caving inward.
And I
rant for that one.
Yeah, I was going to say, someone who let her loose.
I know. I'm probably going to be fired, but yeah.
No. Well, that's the thing. I mean, when we talk about, the pitfalls of exercise technique, we just have to remember that there are some, great machines out there, but there's also some not so great machines when it comes to, the marketing's awesome, right? So they'll talk about, like you said, when it's like, well, do these inner thigh exercises and you'll lose that fat in between the legs. But it's one of the worst things for you because of the mechanics that it changes as far as the muscle imbalances go, and what mechanics that change as far as, in this case, we're talking about the knee for that exercise. So great marketing, bad science, right?
Mm-hmm.
There may be a case for it, but I can't think of many.
Well, and I think it's important too, the abductor machine, the one that goes in the out, pulls your legs and you're starting inward and you're having to drive it outward. I don't do that one either. To me, both of those machines can just go away and leave the industry altogether, because a lot of times what ends up happening is it starts to really focus more, especially if the feet are turned out, working more your piriformis. And that piriformis attaches to your lower back and your sacrum. And so because of that, your sciatic nerve can run through or beside it. So you're actually irritating a muscle, again, that's usually in an overactive position. And so that's why I'm a big advocate for standing lateral two walks, to really focus on the glute minimus and the glute medius and the little muscles of the outer hip that can help realign that femur or that bone, the thigh bone, to get better alignment. So I also just wanted to throw that part in there.
Well, I think we're already talking about the next one already, but for those of you listening to us here on Random Fit, what we are talking about, both Wendy Batts and I, are avoiding common pitfalls. And we're talking about 5 exercise techniques that we all need to master. Although we're talking about exercise techniques, we're talking about machines, and we just talked about the knee, but you can't talk about the knee without talking about the hip, which we have been talking a lot about the hip already. So so when we talk about the hip and bad exercise or poor exercise technique, one way to identify, or a few ways to identify, or a few compensations, I'll say, that are identifiable through watching the hip are when someone squats, are they leaning too far forward? And when I say leaning too far forward, does their torso angle and does their shin angle match? If not, to where I have more of a lean forward through my spine than my shin, then that's what I would consider as an excessive forward lean. Or does my low back, or does my person's low back arch too much? Or is there a shift in the hips left or right when they're performing something like a squat or even a hinge? So from that vantage point, when we talk about the hips, we talked about the abductor machine, as far as possible exercises that will lead to greater imbalance in the hip. But when we are looking at the hips, we want to look at, first of all, how mobile are our hips? How much internal, external rotation does the hip have to do the exercises that we want him to do? But how much extensibility do we have through the front of the hip? Or in this case, a lot of times people are complaining, or they have identifiable movement patterns consistent with having overactive or even weak hip flexors. So these are things that we want to consider when we look at that lumbopelvic hip complex, or basically the center of your body.
Yeah. So when you're talking, I'm going to go low back arch. Let's think about that, because low back arch is very, very common, especially if someone's sitting in a computer, they're driving a lot, they're runners even. When those hip flexors are tight, what it does is it pulls your hips into a forward position. And when your hip bones, like the 2 hip bones go in a downward direction, so your ASIS bones are tilted downward, then the back of you ends up going in a forward, like it becomes more forward, which will increase that curve. Well, think about the compression that you're putting onto your lumbar spine, and you have these discs that go in between there. So when people are complaining that they've got low back discomfort, and you notice they have an anterior tilt, by stretching the front of your hips and strengthening your glutes, what it's going to do is hopefully try to get you back into a more of a neutral position. So if you see someone with that, then you're going to, really focus on stretching the front and really focusing on the posterior end, so your glutes, to try to maintain better alignment and positioning. Now, again, there's other muscles to consider, because also with that compression is on the disc, your erectors get into a shortened position. Your lats can play a role in that because of where they insert into the lower back. And so what we want to focus on too, or what are some good exercises to help with that? Again, just said it, bridges, hip thrusts, things that are going to focus on getting you out of hip flexion, putting you more into extension. However, what we've seen, again, going into the gym, just being aware of the surroundings, a lot of times when people have this anterior pelvic tilt, I will see them grab a medicine ball. So please don't do this if you have this. You grab a medicine ball, you sit on your tailbone, you lift your feet up, and you take the medicine ball and you go side to side. Well, okay, I'm working my obliques. This is great. I'm working my stomach. Okay, so think about this. If you're in that position, your feet are off the ground, your tailbone's down, and you're taking the medicine ball and you're moving your arms side to side, or you're usually rotating through your lumbar spine. Again, that is already compressed. I'm hip flexed because my feet are up and floating. So again, I've shortened a muscle that's already shortened. I'm sitting on the muscle that needs to be activated. And now I'm adding this motion and increasing stress, and now getting movement in my lumbar spine. And I want to know why my lower back is irritated. So one of the things you want to think about is when you're doing different types of rotation, you want your rotation to come from your thoracic spine. So your mid back, not your head, not your cervical spine, or not your lumbar spine. Those two should be stable. And the motion and mobility should come from your mid back, where most people, unfortunately, we'll move on and go to shoulders, but most people should be more mobile there, and they're not because of their positioning and being in a forward position. So if you're trying to think about looking at something that's going to benefit you, think about the muscles that are weaker that are allowing those compensations to happen. And that's really those muscles that you want to focus on.
Yeah. And another, just one basic point about exercise pitfalls, especially when it comes to the hip, it's about progression. You're bringing up those med ball twists. That has a place, but and you bring up a great exercise point. Yeah, where should that range of motion be coming from? Now, with the hips, it is about progression in my mind, as far as being able to incorporate good exercise techniques for the hips, and that the progression being from can you control the body? Can you hold still? As it relates to stabilization, can we stabilize? Can those smaller muscles control the spine? And then we can work into our flexing, so our sit-ups and extensions and our rotations for what we want the spine to do. And then we can start to throw things. So I think a lot of people get caught up as far as, again, falling into a pitfall from the standpoint that they try to do all the sexy stuff. They want to do all the things that, okay, I need to get my abs stronger. My strength coach told me I need to get stronger abs. So they go with strength exercises before they do the requisite stabilization first. And then we can move into strength and power oriented exercises. So yeah, we need to have strong midsection. We need to have a strong hip complex, but we need to have stability first. So again, that's a big pitfall in general, is that we tend to latch onto what's cool, what's sexy, what's hip, what's trendy, before giving the body exactly what it needs first before we do those other things.
Indeed. So a good exercise for that, just if you want to counter that and you're working on your abs, do your Palloff presses. Grab a cable, set it up to where you're going, it's level with basically your rib cage. And then you just hold that weight out for 3 to 5 seconds and then bring it inward and repeat that. You're really focusing on all the components, especially if you're working, you want to work your obliques, because the opposite oblique from that has to be able to withstand and control that. It's unbelievable exercise. It's something that doesn't cause a lot of stress to the actual spine itself, and where you can hit your abs and not have to worry about the rotation until, again, you set it until you're ready and you know that those compensations are out, and then you're really focusing on different prime movers. But if we move up to the next one, so number 3 would be the rounded shoulders. So and we bring this one up because I think it's very important. We see this more and more. Again, think about how many people are sitting in front of a computer, they're driving, they're picking up their kids, they're playing baseball, they're doing different things, and everything is just forward, forward, forward. Well, over time, your body is going to go to the path of least resistance. If it's used to that position, it stays in that position, and that's a compensation. So if you have that, you're going to notice there's more excessive rounding in the shoulders or in the upper back region. So that could be increased, what they call increased thoracic kyphosis, which is what you don't want. Don't want to have that hump back. And so you want to think about exercises that could cause potential increases of injury if you notice that yourself or your client has these rounded shoulders. Exercises that would help get out of that would be things such as a row, such as a cobra. Anything that's going to drive you back, trying to focus on, if it's in the shoulders, your rear delt. You're going to be working on those muscles, your mid to lower trap. You're really trying to get those shoulder blades to come down and together, because right now they're spread apart and they're wide. And that's what's allowing that to happen. So we want to strengthen it to try to bring ourselves back into more of a neutral position. Those are exercises that are going to help at that particular compensation. Other exercises, and I've seen this happen, and this happened to a professional baseball player that had a rounded shoulder, came in, did not work with me, but came in and loved to do particular exercises. We're trying to think about exercises that could increase that risk of injury based on where they are until we can correct that compensation, which unfortunately doesn't happen overnight. It could take 3 to 4 weeks or more, depending on what you're doing to counteract that forward position. So an exercise that I see that if you notice this happens, you may want to avoid with yourself or your client would be something like a dip. And Ken, I don't know how you feel about that, but dips, I love them. But think about this: your shoulders in a forward position, right? And you've got your arm bone, right? So you got your humerus, and it's sitting already in a very shallow ball and socket joint. And if that actual bone is more in a forward position, and then I put myself on a bar and I put all of my body weight down onto that, then, and what I said I've seen unfortunately happen is that particular pitcher went down into a dip just using body weight, and that humerus came basically out of his ball and socket. And so it was a big ordeal because not only could he not pitch, but it almost ended his career.
Yeah, and I am a victim. Ken Miller, I'm a victim of doing bar dips. So, and this was a time when, I was much younger, and it's, again, talk about trendy, hip, sexy. I had 90 pounds of weight around my waist while I was performing a bar dip, right? I was fine during it, but it was right after after the workout, I was diagnosed with a shoulder strain. It kept me out of working out, anything pushing, pulling, anything overhead for 3 months. And, I was feeling good. I was strong, but because the bar dips, especially how much load I had. And again, Wendy, you brought up the ball and socket. The thing about so you think about the hip as more of a ball and socket. The shoulder is more of a golf ball and tee. So there is a little place for the humerus to sit in that joint, but it's not deep at all. It's very shallow, which means the trade-off is that you have the range of motion. I can reach up, back, forward, side to side, but the trade-off there is the lack of stability, which means form and technique are going to be very, very, very important, especially if you're targeting certain muscles. So Wendy, your discussion there on rounded shoulders, this is where form and technique, along with proper exercise selection, go hand in hand. You can have a great exercise like a cobra or T or even a scaption, but if you perform it in that forward shoulder position that you described, Wendy, like you would in a bar dip, as I lower my torso to the floor, my elbow comes back and my shoulder pops forward, right? That's poor exercise selection with poor technique. Yeah, you are going to be primed for injury. So when it comes to the shoulder, we want good exercise selection, good form and technique, ears, shoulders, hips. So the shoulder, the glenohumeral joint, is sitting just right on the center of the rib cage, not too far forward. And I don't want to go too far the other back, because now you're compensating the other way, because other joints are going to move out of position. So when it comes to the rounded shoulders, good exercise selection along with good exercise technique are the key to keeping a good shoulder healthy.
Oh, yes. I know I'm going to probably get hate mail for some of this, but it's really just thinking about, if you're working your triceps, there are so many safer ways of working your triceps with better alignment. And
Yep.
One of the ones that I would suggest, like if it's for the triceps and you have rounded shoulders, grab one of the ropes with the two balls on the end, what I'm
The
talking
stoppers.
about? Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then but you're pulling them apart, and you're going down and you're keeping it down. You don't bring it back together. You always keep them apart. So therefore you're getting more rear delt at the same time while you're working your triceps, and you're able to go through a better range of motion. It's one of those exercises that we do. It's really hard, but we're not keeping it in front. We're actually going to where our hands meet our hips. So we're spreading them out to get better range. And again, I bring that one up just because I've seen it happen. And it's one of those things where I'm just like, oh my goodness, I have totally taken dips out of all my clients' programs, even if they have good alignment, because you see it once, you can't unsee that again. And so it's just something that I wanted to throw out there, my rationale before I get hate mail of why I say that. Even though it does look cool, especially with the big belt and the big weights in front, you got the chains hanging and all that fun stuff. I mean, it looks amazing, but if it's not an Instagrammable moment with perfect form, just don't do it. So
that's right. So
But
let's,
another one. So when we think about the 5, okay, we've already talked about knees. We just talked about the hips. We've talked about the shoulders. The next one I really want to bring forward is the forward head, or bring to the forefront is the forward head. And the reason being is this big fat muscle that's right here is called your sternocleidomastoid. So people will shorten that and say SCM for short. And that is a huge muscle that when it gets locked down, it can pull that clavicle upward and anteriorly towards the forward side. And your clavicle, guys, which is just your collarbone, should slightly move into a different position. And so when it gets locked down, then it starts to mess with the integrity of the shoulder. It can also cause you to elevate, and it also can affect your breathing. And so what you want to think about is trying to do any type of exercise that can cause like retraction. So you try to bring your chin back and strengthen the muscles in the back of the head, and that will really, really help you. Plus, when the sternocleidomastoid gets really tight, it can cause behind the eye headaches. There are a lot of different things that can happen. And so just think, if you're doing exercises where you're really not focusing on keeping that chin back into good alignment, it is actually causing more of that rounded shoulder. It can, like I said, decrease your breathing patterns. So I just wanted to bring that one to the forefront, because there are a lot of different exercises you can do. Or even when you're driving in your car, tell your client to keep their head on the headrest as long as it's not being pushed forward. And that is something that's easily avoidable.
yep. The magic of chin tucks, just keeping that head stacked right on the shoulders. That's I try to keep it simple for my clients like that. So chin tucks, as you described, Wendy, just as far as aligning the ears with the shoulders, one way to alleviate stress in the neck. And as far as techniques go, I think, Wendy, the last and final one that goes missing in a lot of exercise routines and workouts is tempo or speed of the work. You just go too fast sometimes. Well, I'd say 90% of the time, if anybody's going to get into a bad posture, bad position, put themselves at the biggest risk for injury, it's moving too fast.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so let's look at the bicep curls. Love biceps. It's always about the
Yeah.
gun show. We've done a whole episode on the importance of the gun show, looking at your bis and tris, and especially with summer coming up, who does not want to have big arms and sculpted bis and tris? The thing is if you go and you grab heavy weights and you just throw them up and down, it's more of a momentum thing. You can arch your back, you can have rounded shoulders because the weight's not appropriate. But if you put a tempo to it, so let's say you go up for 1 second, you hold, and then you slowly lower for 3 to 4 seconds, you're having to eccentrically decelerate, which causes more time under tension, which is actually going to help with that muscle getting the strength that it needs to be able to lift more and more as you get stronger. So all I can just say is just slow it down, take your time, think about the prime mover. What are you trying to achieve? Maintain the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints in every exercise that you do. Really slow it down on the way down, bring it back up, focus on that and every muscle that you're working on first. So when you lift a heavier load, your body, your stabilizers and everything have better alignment. So you're going to get better movement, and you're going to also get the aesthetic look that you're hoping for over time faster than you will if you're just throwing it up for the sake of just doing the exercise to do it.
Yeah. And just like what we talked about with progression, stability, strength, and power, we can take the same approach to speed. Everything has its place. If you move better slow, you're going to move better fast, is what I tell actually all my clients, not just my athletes. So speed kills if it's too fast.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I want to say, first of all, thank you for joining Ken Miller and I today on Random Fit, talking about avoiding pitfalls, especially listening to some of my rants on some of the exercise selections that are out there. Just make sure it makes sense for your client, make sure it makes sense for you, and within the programming of what's in the best interest based on their assessment. Ken, thank you as always for your knowledge and bringing some great information and stories to the forefront as always. And we want to thank our listeners. Thank you guys for joining Ken and I today on this episode. And we hope to see you again in the future very, very soon. But be sure to download, like, comment, let us know what more you would like to hear from us. Be sure to give us 5 stars if you can. And we can't wait to see you again next week. So until next time, guys, take care and be well.